Brandon Parker wasn't just an ordinary man. He was a playboy of the highest caliber in the universe. With ideal height, a handsome face sculpted as if from the brightest stars, and a charming smile that could melt anyone's heart, Brandon was the kind of guy women fell for at first sight, only to realize, after 5 minutes of conversation, oh, I shouldn't trust this guy. He'd set foot on every planet in the galaxy, from the dazzling, light-filled lands of Celestia to the stinking slums of Zorath, flirting with every species imaginable, from three-eyed aliens to singing mermaids beneath the Martian oceans. But no one, not a single creature, had ever managed to tame the wild heart of this cosmic rogue. Until today, when fate decided to play a cruel trick on him. Brandon was lounging in the pilot's seat of his spaceship, Lucky Star, his long legs propped carelessly on the dashboard, a sparkling green drink in hand, a Celestian specialty he gleefully dubbed Angel Tears. Everything was perfect. The engine's hum was a cosmic symphony. Stars twinkled outside the window, and freedom coursed through his chest. He took a sip, thinking to himself, life doesn't get sweeter than this. Then, out of nowhere, the alarm blared like a cat with its tail stepped on. Beep! 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 Brandon jolted, nearly choking on his drink. The glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor, and leaving a glowing green puddle, as if the ship had been attacked by a slime monster. He bolted upright, eyes glued to the main screen. His heart sank to his boots when he saw it, a massive warship the size of a flying city, barreling toward him at terrifying speed. No! No way! Brandon muttered, sweat breaking out like a flood. He recognized that ship instantly, the Devourer, the legendary flagship of Princess Grolga, the terror of every galactic wanderer. It wasn't just a ship, it was a living warning. Cross my master, and you'll be ground into cosmic dust. Brandon swallowed hard, his trembling hand wiping sweat from his brow. He knew he'd landed himself in deep trouble, and the horrific memory from 3 days ago crashed back like an inescapable nightmare. 3 days earlier, on the planet Torvax, Brandon had been living like a king. He sat at the center of a lavish feast, wine overflowing, beauties surrounding him, laughter echoing through the giant stone pillars of the Torvaxian palace. He'd thought himself the center of the universe, especially when his gaze locked onto a towering, muscular woman, nearly 3 meters tall, her body forged like steel, eyes blazing like twin flames. He winked at her, tossing out what he considered peak artistry in flirtation. Hey, babe, are you a volcano? Because you just made my heart erupt. She laughed, a booming sound like thunder, then handed him a necklace made of sea cactus bone, a bizarre but undeniably cool piece of jewelry. Brandon, with his reckless, fearless stupidity, accepted it without a second thought. He slipped it around his neck, assuming it was just a souvenir from an enthusiastic admirer. But it wasn't an ordinary gift. On Torvax, ancient tradition decreed that if a man accepted a gift from a woman, it was a sign of betrothal. And that muscular beauty was none other than Princess Grolga, the only daughter of the Torvax dynasty, an undefeated warrior and a love-obsessed lunatic to be feared. When Brandon learned the truth from a kind waiter who whispered, "You just got engaged to the princess," he bolted immediately, racing to Lucky Star faster than a meteor storm. But Grolga wasn't the type to let go easily. From that moment, the relentless chase began, with the Devourer tailing him like a tireless giant hunting dog. "Princess Grolga is hailing us," the ship's AI announced, its voice as calm as a weather report. Brandon slammed the reject button, but the main screen flared to life anyway, and Grolga's enormous face filled the display, dominating the frame. She sat on her throne, her fiery eyes gazing at him with smitten intensity, as if he were a delicious meal she'd craved for ages. "Brandon, my love!" Her voice boomed like a supernova, rattling the entire ship. "I know you're running, but fate has bound us. You are my husband." Brandon shuddered, feeling like ants were crawling up his spine. He forced a weak smile. Princess Grolga, look, I'm just a wanderer, not worthy of you. You should find someone stronger, a real warrior." "You don't need to be strong," Grolga laughed, her gleaming white teeth like a row of icebergs, shaking the screen. "You just need to be mine. Stop your ship now, and I'll take you back to Torvax. We'll have the grandest wedding in the galaxy." "Sounds great," Brandon replied, voice trembling. "But I've got some stuff to do. Catch you later, okay?" He cut the feed in a flash, yanking the throttle and pushing Lucky Star to max speed. The ship shot forward, shuddering violently as if it might fall apart, but the Devourer stayed right behind, massive and menacing like a cosmic beast ready to swallow its prey. "Distance closing to 20,000 kilometers," the AI reported, its calm tone infuriating. Brandon gritted his teeth, sweat streaming down his chin. If Grolga caught him, he'd be forced to wear Torvax's traditional groom armor, a 300-kilogram suit studded with glowing metal, looking like a walking lantern. He'd rather blast himself into space than let that happen. He pulled up the galactic map, fingers flying across the touchscreen. Only one planet was within hyperspace range, Xiron, a place he'd never heard of, but better than falling into Grolga's hands. "All right, all bets on Xiron." He adjusted the course and hit the hyperspace button. The ship shook harder, plunging into Xiron's atmosphere like a bullet. But just as it pierced the thick clouds, a deafening boom rocked the cabin. The main engine exploded, black smoke billowing everywhere. Brandon stared at the dashboard, eyes wide with panic. "Damn it!" The warning system flashed red. Critical damage. Safe landing impossible. With no time to think, Brandon grabbed a jet parachute and slammed the emergency hatch button. The door sprang open, and he was sucked out like a leaf in a tornado. Wind howled in his ears, hair whipping wildly, as he free fell at breakneck speed. Below, a bizarre scene came into view. A vast plaza where thousands of alien creatures gathered around a massive stage, as if celebrating something monumental. He gripped the parachute straps, trying to steer away from the crowd. But fate, ever the prankster, had other plans. "No!" Brandon screamed as he realized he was plummeting straight into the ceremony center, like a wayward meteor. And then, boom! He crashed into the ground, right between two strangers. The impact was so hard he felt his spine twist into an S shape, and the two women beneath him surely fared no better. The crowd fell silent, frozen as if witnessing a miracle or a disaster. Brandon groaned, cracking open his eyes to find himself sprawled atop the pair, his body aching like a cosmic elephant had stomped on him. But worse than the pain was the sea of eyes staring at him. And atop the stage, a towering man with a silver beard gazed down, his eyes gleaming with strange excitement. Behind him stood dozens of guards in radiant golden armor, wielding glowing swords that screamed, "You're done for, buddy." Brandon swallowed hard, trying to disentangle himself without making things worse. I can explain," he stammered, but before he could finish, The crowd erupted in frenzied cheers. The gods have chosen a consort. He's the destiny of both princesses. One man touching two princesses at once. This is unprecedented. Brandon's jaw dropped, his mind spinning. Hold on, wait a sec. He turned to the blonde on his left, Princess Penelope, with hair shimmering like sunlight and wide blue eyes full of surprise. She exuded elegance and gentleness, yet her gaze held a sharp intelligence. Princess, can you explain what's happening? Penelope smiled softly, still a bit flustered. According to Xiron's ancient laws, if a man touches a princess during the consort selection ceremony, it means the gods have chosen him as her husband. Brandon froze, mouth agape. Wait, so that means... The other princess, Alara, with sleek black hair and eyes sharp as blades, gritted her teeth, cutting him off. It means you have to marry both of us. What? Brandon yelped, his voice jumping an octave. He turned to the silver-bearded king, who beamed atop the stage. Your Majesty, I think there's been a mistake. I just fell here by accident. King Xiron laughed heartily, his voice booming like a great bell. No mistake. This is divine will. The gods sent you here at the most sacred moment. Do you dare defy their decree? Brandon broke into a cold sweat, glancing at Alara with a flicker of hope. But her icy stare suggested that one wrong word could get him sliced in half. Penelope, meanwhile, remained eerily calm, even amused, watching him squirm. He took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. Okay, I get it, but is there a way to cancel the engagement? The crowd fell deathly silent. Eyes widened in horror, as if he'd uttered a forbidden curse. You dare defy Xiron's traditions? A minister roared. This is an insult to the royal family, another shouted. Brandon had never felt so hated in his life. King Xiron clapped twice, and instantly 2 rows of royal guards stepped forward, surrounding him like wolves closing in on prey. No one can undo a union ordained by the gods, the king said, his voice kind yet commanding. Now take our future consort to the palace. Brandon opened his mouth to protest, but 2 guards seized his arms and dragged him off. Hey, I should have a choice, he yelled, but no one cared. Penelope and Alara watched him go, one with a curious smile, the other with a scowl. And so, Brandon Parker, once a playboy fleeing love, was now forced into a marriage he'd never dreamed of. Not with 1, but 2 princesses. They hauled him through the palace's gleaming gold corridors, each step of the guards clacking with regal precision. Giant statues of Xiron's past kings and queens lined the halls, their stone eyes glaring down as if to say, Welcome to royal hell, kid. He was shoved into a small room to change into Xyronian attire. Damn it, how did I end up in this mess? He muttered, his mind reeling with thoughts of Princess Grolga, the 2 Xiron princesses, and the twisted fate laughing at him from somewhere in the vast universe. Minutes later, he was thrust into a grand chamber. King Xiron sat on his throne, grinning like he'd won the lottery. The 2 princesses flanked him, each with a distinct demeanor. Penelope curious and entertained, Alara arms crossed, eyeing him like prey about to be gutted. Lucky young man, the king boomed, his warm voice filling the room. What's your name? Brandon frowned, replying warily, I'm Brandon Parker from Earth, Your Majesty. Am I really lucky here? Indeed. The king nodded eagerly. Hundreds of mighty warriors on this planet have vied for the honor of being consort, but none were chosen. Yet you, a stranger from a distant world, were sent by the gods right into our ceremony. This is clearly destiny. Destiny? Brandon gave a dry laugh, his voice cracking. You say the gods sent me? I think they're just messing with me. Young man, do you intend to mock Xiron's faith? The king's tone remained calm, but a sharp edge made Brandon flinch. He raised his hands, backpedaling fast. All right. No offense intended. It's just, maybe there's a mix-up. He turned to Penelope, hoping for a rational ally. Princess, you seem smart. You must think this is absurd, right? Penelope tilted her head, her smile unwavering. Who says it's absurd? Brandon gaped. You don't see it? We've never met. I just crashed into you by accident. But that's what makes it special, she replied, her voice soft, but layered with meaning. He turned to Alara, desperate for support. What about you, Princess Alara? You don't like me, right? So let's call off the wedding. Alara snorted, arching a brow. You think I can cancel it? Xiron's laws have stood for millennia. Once it's decreed, no one can change it. Not me, not my sister. Brandon stared at her, voice trembling. What about my choice? You don't have one, Alara shot back, her gaze icy enough to freeze him solid. Come now, Brandon, the king interjected, smiling kindly. Isn't it better to accept your fate? Brandon forced a grin, lips twitching. You make it sound like this is some lucky gift. Isn't it? The king pressed, enthusiasm rising. You'll be a consort, live in a lavish palace, marry two of Xiron's most beautiful women, and have an entire planet behind you. Don't you find that appealing? Brandon opened his mouth to argue, then paused. Honestly, it wasn't that bad. He'd roamed the galaxy his whole life. No home, no roots, nothing to call his own. Now he had a shot at being royalty on a wealthy, powerful planet. But it does sound tempting, he admitted, but I'm not the responsible type. The king roared with laughter. Then it's time you learn to be. Before Brandon could react, a guard stepped forward, bowing respectfully to the king. Your Majesty, it's time to begin the consort training. Wait! Training? Brandon yelped, his voice cracking. Of course, the king said with a gentle smile. If you're to join the royal family, you must learn to act like a proper consort. Brandon let out a long, defeated sigh. No escaping this, huh? No, the king replied simply, his smile making Brandon want to dig a hole and hide. The king clapped twice, and two more guards entered. Take the consort to prepare. Before being dragged off, Brandon glanced back at the princesses. Penelope still smiled with delight, as if watching a great play. Alara stood with arms crossed, her cold stare saying, Good luck, fool. And so began Brandon's journey into a role he'd never imagined, training to become Xiron's consort. Lesson 1. Royal Etiquette. Brandon was led into a vast hall where dozens of courtiers, royal tutors, martial trainers, and guards awaited. At the center stood a middle-aged man with a gray beard reaching his chest, dressed in a splendid robe like a legendary sorcerer. He regarded Brandon with a mix of sternness and curiosity. Welcome, future consort, he said, his deep voice resonating like a bronze bell. Brandon scratched his head, replying awkwardly, Hi. I am High Priest Calidus, tasked with training you to become a true consort, the man declared, pride ringing in his tone. Brandon glanced at the onlookers. They all stared at him, like he was some exotic beast dragged in from the wilds of the cosmos. Great. So, what do I need to learn? He asked, skepticism thick in his voice. Calidus clapped once, and a courtier stepped forward, holding a massive parchment scroll so long it looked like an ancient rug. The required curriculum for an Zyron consort, Calidus announced, unrolling it and reading in a steady monotone. First, royal etiquette. Second, Zyronian combat arts. Third, interplanetary politics and diplomacy. Fourth, Zyron's history and culture. Fifth, leadership and kingdom management. Sixth. Brandon raised a hand, eyes wide. Hold on, hold on. Is this consort training or a military academy? Calidus smiled, a blend of kindness and menace. And Zyron consort isn't just a princess's husband. He's a guardian of the realm, a warrior, a leader. Brandon gave a dry laugh, voice twisting. Sounds pretty heavy, huh? We begin immediately, Calidus declared, giving Brandon no time to breathe. Wait! Before he could protest, 2 guards grabbed his arms and hauled him off like a sack of grain. He groaned inwardly. Why did I land in this mess? They led him to a grand room where an extravagant feast awaited. Strange, vibrant dishes, from shimmering purple soup to glowing roast meat, sparked both curiosity and hunger. Calidus gestured for him to sit. Lesson 1. Dining like a consort. Brandon raised an eyebrow, smirking. Seriously? I know how to eat. No, you don't, Calidus replied, voice like ice. He waved, and a servant placed a bowl of glistening purple soup before Brandon, looking like a flowing gem. Eat, but follow proper etiquette. Brandon lifted the spoon, about to take a sip, when Calidus raised a hand. Stop! He flinched, nearly dropping the spoon. What the hell? Calidus's face hardened. You just committed a grave error. On Zyron, a consort must sing a song before eating. Brandon nearly choked, jaw dropping. Sing before eating? You're kidding, right? Calidus wasn't kidding. Without the song, the food isn't blessed by the gods. Brandon sighed heavily, setting the spoon down. Fine, I'll sing. But what? Calidus waved, and a musician stepped forward, playing a solemn tune on a glowing harp. Brandon pursed his lips, scrambling for something to sing. Finally, he croaked out, half embarrassed, half careless. I am a consort, and I'm really hungry. Calidus's eyes widened, as if he'd heard an earth-shattering insult. That's not the traditional song, Brandon shrugged, smirking. I made it up. Calidus sighed, rubbing his forehead as if suppressing a headache. We have much work to do with you. Brandon grinned, picking up the spoon. Fine, but can I rest after eating? Calidus gave him a pitying look. Not yet, consort. You still need to learn how to walk, speak, ride war beasts, wield a light sword, and more. Brandon dropped the spoon onto the table, face twisting. I hate this place already. Calidus only smiled, his tone gentle yet threatening. You'll get used to it. But Brandon wasn't so sure. He had a sinking feeling that life on Zyron would torment him even more than being chased by Princess Grolga. After the torturous dining etiquette lesson, Brandon thought he'd survived the first trial, but it was just the warm-up. Calidus, with his saintly smile and welcome to hell eyes, gave him no respite. 2 burly guards reappeared, grabbing his arms like he was a runaway chicken, dragging him to another part of the palace. This time, it was the sword training area, and waiting for him was none other than Princess Alara. She stood there, arms crossed, her dagger-sharp eyes scanning him head to toe. In her hand was a light sword, its blade emitting a pale blue glow of menace. She tossed him a matching weapon, her voice cold. Take it! I want to see how well you fight. Brandon caught the sword, hands trembling slightly. He eyed the gleaming blade, then Alara, who looked ready to skewer him if he made a wrong move. Do we have to fight for real? He asked, trying to sound calm but failing to hide his nerves. Alara's lips curled into a smile that was more a death threat than a grin. "You can try, but I won't guarantee you'll survive intact." Brandon stepped back, hands up in surrender. "I changed my mind. Can I learn politics first?" But Alara didn't bother replying. She charged like a whirlwind, her light sword slashing with terrifying speed, leaving a blazing trail in the air. Brandon yelped, instinctively raising his blade to block, and was promptly knocked backward, tumbling across the stone floor like a discarded sack. "Too slow," Alara commented, her face expressionless, as if swatting him aside was trivial. Brandon staggered to his feet, wincing as he clutched his shoulder. "Princess, I'm just a pretty face, not a warrior," he groaned, forcing a pleading smile. Alara didn't care. "If you want to survive in Xiron's royal family, you need to learn to defend yourself," she said, voice like ice. Brandon sighed, realizing escape was impossible. He gripped the sword tighter, focusing as best he could, though his mind was filled with visions of green liquor and dreams of freedom now far out of reach. This time, when Alara lunged, he sidestepped in a dodge-first move, then clumsily struck back. Alara parried effortlessly, but the corner of her mouth twitched, a rare smile. "Slightly better, still pathetic." Brandon grinned, panting. "At least I didn't get knocked down again." Alara's smile vanished. "You're overconfident too soon." Before he could react, she swept his legs with a hammer-like kick, sending him sprawling once more. She stepped forward, pressing her sword to his throat, voice low. "You've got a lot to learn, Consort." Brandon lay flat, staring up at the glowing blade and Alara's icy face. "Fantastic," he muttered. "Day 1 as Consort, and I'm already a punching bag." After a grueling day of riding a war beast, a 6-legged monster with glowing horns that Brandon swore tried to throw him off at least 3 times, and sparring with Alara, he dragged himself back to his room like a walking corpse. Each step was a silent groan, and all he wanted was to collapse on the bed and forget the world. But as he reached the door, a soft voice chimed, "Looks like you had a fun day, huh?" Brandon turned, glaring at Princess Penelope. She stood there, golden hair gleaming under the palace lights, her smile both gentle and mischievous. "If fun means getting beaten, tossed onto a beast, and insulted by a warrior princess, then yeah, it's been a blast," he retorted, dripping with sarcasm. Penelope laughed, her voice clear as wind chimes. "You know, I'm starting to like you." Brandon raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Because I'm dumb enough to accept this fate?" "No." She shook her head, eyes twinkling. "Because you didn't run." Brandon paused, then sighed. "Trust me, if there was a way out, I'd be gone." Penelope smiled, and then turned to leave. "Good night, Consort." Brandon watched her go, shaking his head in despair. "I'm cursed." He opened the door, flopped onto the bed, too exhausted to think. Day 1 as Consort, awful, and he had a bad feeling tomorrow would be worse. He wasn't wrong. The next morning, while Brandon was dead asleep, dreaming of his free days on Lucky Star, his door burst open. "Consort, get up now!" a booming voice roared, jolting him awake. He rolled off the bed in a pathetic heap. Eyes bleary, he vaguely saw a group of guards at the door, their faces stern as if he'd just assassinated the king. "What the hell?" he groaned, clutching his head. "I barely slept." A guard stepped forward, voice commanding, "You have a royal breakfast with the princesses and His Majesty today. A consort doesn't sleep in." Brandon grimaced, slumped on the floor. "Is there a law against sleeping in?" Yes, the guard replied without hesitation. Rule 47 of the Royal Code. The consort must rise before Xiron's second son. Brandon muttered a curse under his breath, dripping with frustration. What kind of palace is harsher than a boot camp? He reluctantly crawled up, dragged to a dressing room where a team of maids awaited with royal garb, a heavy gold-embroidered robe that seemed designed to torture rather than adorn. "Consort, please, raise your arms," a maid said, her tone gentle but firm. Brandon yawned, lifting his arms like a puppet as they dressed him. Looking in the mirror, he sighed deeply. Why do I feel like a doll? No one answered, and he shuffled off to the dining hall. The table stretched endlessly, laden with bizarre dishes, glowing orbs steaming with mist, plates of meat shifting colors. Penelope and Alara were already seated, each in their own way. Penelope smiling softly, Alara arms crossed with her usual scowl. King Xiron sat at the center, beaming as Brandon entered. "Ah, my young consort, sleep well?" the king asked, voice hearty. Brandon gave a crooked smile, slumping into his chair. "Oh, I slept great, until your guards kicked me out of bed." The king roared with laughter, as if it were the funniest thing he'd ever heard. "Good, good! That's how a man should start his day." Brandon reached for a fork, but Colitis, that damned etiquette master, strode in, clearing his throat ominously. Brandon froze, hand hovering midair. "Did I forget something?" Colitis's voice was stern. "You forgot to sing." Brandon's eyes bulged, nearly toppling from his chair. Penelope giggled, while Alara just stared with an "I told you so" look. The king nodded, cheerful. "Indeed. Tradition demands the consort sing a short song to thank the gods before eating." Brandon grumbled, voice thick with resentment. "This royal family and its weird rules." He stood reluctantly, cleared his throat, and sang half-heartedly, "Oh gods, please bless this food, so I don't starve today." The courtiers exchanged stunned glances. Colitis frowned, voice stiff. "That's not the traditional song." Brandon shrugged, plopping back down. "I made it up." The king laughed uproariously, while Alara shook her head in defeat. "Fine," the king said. "We'll allow some creativity. But next time, sing properly." Brandon nodded absently, thinking, how did my life come to this? After breakfast, he sighed in relief, thinking he could finally nap. But before he could stand, Colitis loomed like a ghost, blocking his path. "Hold on, consort. You have an important duty." Brandon squinted suspiciously. "What now?" "The consort must present gifts to the princesses each morning," Colitis announced, voice flat as if reciting law. Brandon nearly choked, shouting, "What?" Penelope grinned, eyes sparkling. "No gifts, no good, Brandon." Alara crossed her arms, eyebrow raised. "Rules are rules." Brandon glared at Colitis. "This is in the royal code, too?" Colitis nodded, adjusting his glasses. "Rule 23. The consort must show affection to the princesses with a gift each day." Brandon clutched his head, growling, "I don't have any gifts." The king laughed heartily. "Then you have 1 hour to prepare. Otherwise, there's a penalty." "What penalty?" Brandon asked, voice wary. Colitis replied coolly, "Without gifts, the consort must wear a jester's outfit and parade around the palace." Brandon nearly fell off his chair, yelling, "You're saying what?" Penelope clapped delightedly. "You'd better find those gifts. We'll wait." Alara just stared, her expression screaming, "I can't wait to see you fail." Brandon took a deep breath, grinding his teeth. "Fine, I'll get gifts." He bolted from the room like a gust of wind. 1 hour to find gifts. He swore if he survived today, he'd write a book. 101 Ways to Survive an Alien Palace. After a frantic search, he found 2 intriguing items in a palace storeroom: a small glowing stone, beautiful and mystical like a trapped star, and a stuffed Dracor toy, a goofy creature with big, adorable eyes. He grabbed both, muttering, "This'll do." He raced back to the dining hall just as the clock struck the hour. Penelope beamed when he handed her the glowing stone. "Oh, it's gorgeous. Thank you, Brandon," she said, her sweet tone almost making him forget his ordeal. Alara stared at the stuffed toy, eyebrow arched in doubt. "You think I'd like this?" Brandon smirked, feigning confidence. "Even a warrior princess needs some cuteness in her life." Alara eyed it for a moment, then tucked it into her robe, like she didn't want anyone to see, muttering, "Not bad." Brandon exhaled, slumping into his chair. He'd survived the morning's bizarre challenge without becoming a clown. Over the next few days, Brandon adapted to royal life in his own way. He bent the rules cleverly. Instead of singing before meals, he hired royal minstrels to join him. Instead of sparring diligently with Alara, he dodged and ran circles to avoid bruises. One night, while sneaking out for a forbidden drink, strictly off limits for consorts, he overheard a suspicious conversation from a dark corner of the hall. "Everything's ready. The wedding day is the perfect time to strike," a low voice murmured. Brandon froze, pressing himself against the wall, holding his breath. "The king won't suspect a thing. We'll end his reign in front of everyone," another voice added. A chill ran down his spine. This was an assassination plot. "What about the consort?" a third voice asked. "He's just a fool from some backwater planet. Not worth worrying about," the first voice sneered. Brandon smirked inwardly. "Fool? I outshine you clowns any day." "Then it's settled. The princess's wedding day will also be the king's last," the second voice concluded. Brandon held his breath, heart pounding. He couldn't believe it. Someone was plotting to kill King Xiron right in the palace. Though he'd never cared for Xiron's politics, he was now entangled deeper than he'd imagined. And no matter how lazy he was, he couldn't let an assassination unfold before his eyes. The next morning, he sought out Penelope and Alara, his face graver than ever. "I've got something serious to tell you." Alara raised an eyebrow, voice cold. "What?" Brandon glanced around, ensuring no eavesdroppers, then whispered, "Someone's planning to kill King Xiron on the wedding day." Both princesses fell silent. Then Penelope spoke, voice steady. "Are you sure?" Brandon nodded. "I heard them say it myself." Alara clenched her fists, eyes blazing. "If this is true, I won't let it slide." Penelope tapped her chin, pensive. "But we need proof. Accusing someone without evidence could backfire and turn against us." Brandon sighed. "So what do we do?" Alara's gaze sharpened. "We lure them out." Brandon squinted. "How?" Penelope flashed a cryptic smile. "Let them think their plan will succeed." Brandon shivered, muttering, "I've got a feeling my wedding day won't be peaceful." The wedding took place in Xiron's grand palace hall. Hundreds of guests gathered, melodic music filling the solemn air. Floating crystals on the ceiling reflected light, creating a dazzling scene like a cosmic dream. Brandon stood between Penelope and Alara, weighed down by heavy royal garb that felt like a gilded cage. He wasn't relaxed. An assassination loomed, and though the mastermind remained unknown, the princesses had tipped him off that the killer was among the performing dancers. To counter it, Alara and Penelope had secretly planted royal guards disguised as guests, while Brandon stayed on edge, hand gripping a hidden sword under his cloak. Next, we'll enjoy a performance from the Tivar Kingdom's dance troupe, the announcer called, snapping Brandon from his thoughts. Graceful dancers glided into the hall, their movements flowing with the music, dresses fluttering like luminous butterflies. And then, Brandon froze. Among the dancers he spotted a familiar face. Celeste. He blinked, wondering if he'd misseen. But as she twirled, her skirt flaring, he was certain it was her. Celeste, a professional assassin he'd briefly romanced during his galactic travels. A fleeting, dangerous fling, because he knew she wasn't just a woman but a living dagger, ready to slit any throat in her way. And now she was here, in Xiron's palace, at his wedding. This was no coincidence. Brandon narrowed his eyes, tightening his grip. Then he saw her hand subtly rise beneath her voluminous sleeve, a move he knew all too well. Danger surged through him. He leapt from the platform just as Celeste flicked her wrist. A tiny arrow shot from a hidden crossbow aimed straight at the king. Brandon swung his arm, striking her wrist and sending the arrow off course. It thunked into a stone pillar instead of Xiron's chest. Screams erupted through the hall. "Assassin!" Royal guards rushed in as Brandon grappled with Celeste. She fought like a panther, but he was faster, twisting her arm behind her and pinning her to the floor. "Who sent you?" he growled, fury in his voice. Celeste laughed, her eyes fearless and defiant. "He promised me everything, but I know if I fail, I'm just a disposable pawn." She flicked her gaze to the hall's far end. Brandon followed her look and froze. General Dracos, head of the royal guard, stood with arms crossed, his cold eyes surveying the chaos. Brandon squinted. "You're behind this?" Dracos smirked, drawing his sword with a slow, menacing flourish. "So you figured it out." Instantly, a group of royal guards drew their blades, but instead of defending the king, they turned their points toward him. "Protect the king!" Some loyal guards shouted, but the rebels roared louder. "No! We're the true protectors of the kingdom!" Dracos leveled his sword at the king. "Today, Xiron gets a new ruler." He waved, signaling his men to charge. Chaos erupted in the hall. Brandon rolled to dodge a slash, kicking a rebel in the chest and sending him sprawling. Alara and Penelope joined the fray beside him. Dracos watched Brandon from afar, then charged straight at him, light sword swinging like a reaper's scythe. Their blades clashed in a shower of sparks, metal screeching painfully. Brandon quickly realized Dracos was overwhelming. Not just seasoned, but precise. Every strike calculated like a machine. He stumbled back, breathless. "You're good," he admitted, panting. Dracos sneered. "So you'll die?" Brandon grinned faintly, wiping sweat from his brow. "Not a chance." He dodged aside, exploiting a tiny opening to trip Dracos and pin him down, sword at the general's throat. Game over. But then Dracos burst into laughter. Brandon frowned. "You're still laughing?" King Xiron suddenly stood, clapping loudly. "Well done, Brandon. You did excellently." Something felt off. Dracos pushed himself up, brushing dust off his armor like nothing had happened. "I told you, sire. The consort's impressive." Brandon glanced at the princesses, who just smirked with arms crossed. The king stepped forward, voice warm. "This was your final test." Brandon blinked. "Test?" Dracos nodded, standing. "I didn't truly betray the king. It was a staged act, to see if you're worthy of being Xiron's consort." Brandon's jaw dropped, his sword nearly slipping. "So if I'd failed?" The king smiled kindly. The wedding would have been canceled. Brandon staggered back, dazed. So I passed? No more trials? The king nodded. Complete the ceremony. The wedding resumed amid the guests' cheers. Brandon still couldn't believe what had happened, but at least he was now officially Xiron's consort. He glanced at Penelope, smiling gently, and Alara, nodding reluctantly, her gaze less icy than before. From a playboy fleeing love, Brandon had become the husband of two princesses and part of Xiron's dynasty. He muttered to himself, "I'll never forget this insane wedding day,"